American Top 40.
This is Casey Kasem in Hollywood, and it's time now for the current hit by an English singer who got his start impersonating Elvis Presley. He began singing back in the late 50s, and like many other hopeful young men in England and America, he started out by imitating the most successful guy around. When he went on stage, he played guitar, wore pink shirts and black jackets and blue suede shoes, curled his upper lip when he sang, and tried to look moody and rebellious. He also tossed his head and moved suggestively around the stage, just like the king. And the routine worked. English kids bought his records, they packed his concerts, and they mobbed him wherever he went. It was almost a perfect carbon copy of the scene in America whenever Elvis made an appearance. And it wasn't long before fans and critics began calling Cliff Richard England's Elvis Presley. Then late in 1958, the real Elvis went into the Army. His image began to change from a rebellious James Dean type into a polite boy next door. And across the ocean, Cliff Richard began to modify his image too. And like Elvis, he began appearing in big motion pictures. By 1961, he dropped the Elvis impersonation completely. By then, he was a superstar in England in his own right. And he has been ever since. This week, his first top 40 hit since 1963 is up to number 6 on American Top 40. Here's Cliff Richard with Devil Woman.
She's just a devil woman.
Cliff Richard at number 6, second week in the top 10 on AT40 with Devil Woman.
American Top 40.
This is Casey in Hollywood on American Top 40, and it's time now in our countdown for the current smash by the English superstar who owns one of the most remarkable chart records in the history of popular music. Since he first began recording back in the late 50s, he's released a total of 67 singles in his home country. 65 of those have made it to the top 30 on the English charts. 11 of those have hit number 2, and 8 have gone all the way to number 1. And that's not counting the millions of records he's sold and put on record charts in other countries around the world. And yet, in spite of this tremendous success in England and other parts of the world, for some reason, superstar Cliff Richard never quite caught on here in the USA. Until now. Part of the reason for his slow start over here may have been the emphasis in the mid-60s on groups instead of solo singers. But currently, he's making up for lost time. His latest single got all the way to number 6. Now it's at number 32. Cliff Richard and Devil Woman. I drank the potion she offered me, and I found myself on the floor. She's just a devil woman with evil on her mind. That's Cliff Richard on American Top 40 with a former Top 10 record, now at number 32. Devil Woman.
American Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the latest hit by a performer who gave Elton John quite a surprise a few years ago when Elton failed to recognize this singer's voice on a demo tape. The singer's name is Cliff Richard, and although Cliff has had only 4 top 40 singles here in the United States, he's hit the British charts 64 times since 1958 and was so popular that Billboard ranked Cliff Richard as the world's top recording artist of 1964, ahead of Elvis and the Beatles. Well, Cliff dropped out of the music business in the mid-60s, but in the mid-70s he decided to try a comeback. So, looking for a label, Cliff sent an audition tape to John Reed, Elton John's manager. Elton was looking for artists for his new label, Rocket Records, and John Reed decided to play the tape for Elton without telling him who it was. Elton listened attentively to the tape, and when it was over, he said, "This guy's fabulous, let's sign him." With a smile on his face, Reed asked Elton if he knew who the singer was. "Of course not," said Elton, "I've never heard him before in my life." To which Reed replied, "Funny, it's Cliff Richard." Well, at first, Elton refused to believe Reed, and then he was flabbergasted that he had been so completely fooled. Well, Cliff Richard went on to make a big comeback on Elton John's label with his top 10 hit, Devil Woman. And this week, he's back in the countdown. Cliff Richard at number 23 with We Don't Talk Anymore. The former top 10 record now at number 23, falling 10 notches, Cliff Richard and We Don't Talk Anymore.
American Top 40.
You know, in all of chart history, there are only 2 artists who have hit the top 40 in 4 different decades. The first was Perry Como, who peppered the charts with his hits in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. He hit the top 40 in each of those decades. And only one other artist has matched that feat. An Englishman who's hit the top 40 in each of the 4 decades that span the rock era, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And get this,
He did it with the only 4 singles of his career that reached the top 40 on the U.S. pop charts. In the 50s, it was Living Doll. In the 60s, It's All in the Game. In the 70s, Devil Woman. And in January, he peaked with his first hit of the 80s, We Don't Talk Anymore. 4 top 40 hits landing in 4 different decades. And who's the man who's distributed his very few American hits so evenly across the years? Well, he's the super singing star from across the sea, Englishman Cliff Richard. So Cliff and Perry Como are the only 2 artists in chart history to hit the top 40 in 4 different decades. And this week, the 5th top 40 hit in America in Cliff's long career moves up 5 notches to 35. Cliff Richard and Carrie. Cliff Richard moves from number 40, where he debuted last week, to number 35 this week on American Top 40. Cliff Richard and Carrie as the countdown continues.
The hits from coast to coast.
Well, now we're up to the latest hit by a man who found inner peace only after he worked out a compromise between his music and his God. This is the story of British superstar Cliff Richard. When Cliff's career began in 1958, he was immediately labeled Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. And his lifestyle, Cliff says, matched the title. Fast cars, big houses, too many women, and too much drink. Then, in 1964, Cliff's father died. And Cliff Richard says he stopped all of a sudden and took a hard look at his life. He didn't like what he saw, and he went looking for a change. He tried several religious groups. Then, in 1965, Cliff joined Billy Graham's Greater London Crusade and sang a song called It Is No Secret What God Can Do to 25,000 people at Earl's Court Stadium in London. Cliff also announced his intention to quit the music business because people were telling him that rock was un-Christian. But Billy Graham explained to him that if a Christian says rock is bad, Cliff should say that God wouldn't create something bad. Rock isn't bad. It's only the things that people do with the music that can make it evil. That's the advice Cliff Richard says he got from the Reverend Billy Graham. Today, Cliff still sings pop music, but he also makes it a point to tour with a gospel band at least once a year. This week, Cliff Richard is at number 11 in our survey with Dreamin. At number 11 in popularity with Dreamin, that's British superstar Cliff Richard on American Top 40.
American Top 40.
Every week, American Top 40 is heard in the 50 states and around the world on great radio stations like KOYE in Laredo, Texas. Now, we have an AT40 Extra, and it's by the biggest British act in the history of the British charts. Now, the biggest act overall in the British charts was an American, Elvis Presley. Elvis was as much king on the charts in the UK as he was here in the USA. He hit the British charts 95 times. The act in second place is most definitely a loyal subject to the crown, and that makes him the most successful Briton on the British charts. He's a handsome Englishman whose real name is Harry Webb. He was born in Lucknow, India 44 years ago. And while he was still a boy, Harry's parents returned to England, where Harry grew up in the town of Cheshire, north of London. It was in his hometown that he formed his first group, which he called the Drifters. But he later changed that to the Shadows, after he discovered there was an American group called the Drifters. With the Shadows backing him up, singer Harry Webb became Cliff Richard and had his first hit in 1958 with a song called Move It. And since then, he's hit the English chart 83 times, placing him second only to Elvis Presley for hitting the British charts the most, and putting him 44 chart songs ahead of the recording act in third place, another American solo artist named Frank Sinatra. Now, for all of his success in his homeland, Englishman Cliff Richard has hit the Hot 100 here in America only 18 times. That's very good, but nothing compared to the superstar chart success he's had in Great Britain. As an AT40 Extra, here's one of the songs that did become a transatlantic smash, a number 1 hit in the UK, and top 10 here in the USA for the man who's the most successful British act on the British charts. Cliff Richard. From 1979, here's We Don't Talk Anymore. A big number 7 hit from 1979. That's We Don't Talk Anymore by Englishman Cliff Richard, an AT40 Extra.
American Top 40.
Based on 3 decades of hitting the Billboard charts, including the top 10 in the 80s, these are the longevity leaders, the triathlon of rock and roll. The next artist is such a longevity leader that he's been enduring not for 3, but 4 decades on the chart. The only artist in our special survey to hit the top 40 in the 80s, 70s, and 60s, and the 50s. He's been called the Elvis of Britain. A man born in Lucknow, India, to British parents. In the UK, he acted in movies, had his own variety show, and on the British charts had more than 90 hit songs. And he's still hitting. At number 39, here's England's Cliff Richard and his biggest hit of the 80s, Dreamin'. Dreamin', a 1980 top 10 by Cliff Richard. The 47-year-old English star places at number 39 in a special edition of American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem with the Triathlon of Rock and Roll. Artists who have hit big in the 60s, 70s, and the top 10 in the 80s.
The hits from coast to coast.